Hi, so I'm reviewing one of my favorite things this week, and it's this 90 Day Men box set, which has all the studio albums, EPs, unreleased songs. I even got the version that came with this really cool cassette with some really early stuff on it. And when I started this YouTube record review journey, my goal was to review one record a week. Now, obviously, I'm listening to different records pretty much every day, especially if something new comes in. But the goal of actually going through my collection systematically means that I need to tackle a record that maybe I'm not in the mood for that week, or there's something about doing that that feels really daunting, which is the case with this one. 90 Day Men means a lot to me. I knew that the next thing in my rock section, if I'm going in alphabetical order, would be my 90 Day Men box set. Last couple videos I did the 5, 6, 7, 8s. I did Chick, 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 exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. And this was next. So I have the original pressings of the main studio albums in my office, and my office has its own vinyl setup, different from what I used on the last two videos. And I decided to listen to these records on this office setup so I could compare the original pressings that I have to the ones in the remastered box set that Morrow group put out recently. A lot of feels come up for me around these albums, particularly when listening to It Is It Critical Band, which is their first full-length studio album. And I decided to start with that album, even though there are other tracks in the set that predate this album. It is, however, the first full-length studio album that the band put out. When I dropped the needle on side A, my first thought was that the vinyl sounded kind of noisy, dirty, even though I've cleaned this thing a couple of times and not too long ago in my ultrasonic cleaner. When the music started, the background noise kind of faded, and I couldn't hear it anymore. I didn't pay much attention to it. The mix is pretty much what I remember. Casey's cymbals cut through the mix. Sometimes his snare or toms lacked some power. Now, this is in the original pressing, because I wanted to start with the original pressing that I have. And there were ways in which the drums were EQ'd that I think kind of take some of the power away from how Casey played. He plays, really strong, really solid. Brian's guitar was kind of noisy and mid-forward. I don't mean noisy in terms of like the effects and things he used. I mean, it sounded like there wasn't body to the guitar. And Robert's bass was not really cutting through. I mean, I felt it. I heard it at times when things kind of went quiet. But this is the mix that I fell in love with when I was 18 or 19 years old. And it sounds almost like you're hearing it through a friend's pair of headphones that they're sharing with you, with the fuzzy ear covering. And, like something that you hear out of a CD Walkman in the late 90s. I can hear the effects that Brian used on his guitar. I hear nuances of like the little noises and the stuff that Andy, their keyboard player, was sprinkling in here or there. And, I hear nuances in the first pressing vinyl that I never heard back when I was first exposed to the CD in my friend's car. So I appreciate that. In that first pressing, the space between the instruments is fantastic. There's transients in the cymbals that ring out, plenty of harmonics. The only thing to be desired is a more clear and articulate bass tone. I can hear Robert's parts much better when the guitar and drums are quieter. Overall, while I do love this album and have a fondness for this older mix and master, I really loved the remaster. It gave It Is It Critical Band the lower end that I always thought it needed. The remaster in the box set has somewhat quieter vinyl, but not dead silent. It's still somewhat noisy. But it did really give Robert's bass the love and attention that I think it deserved. The drums also sound more balanced. They have more punch, the way KC would play. This remaster is a bit louder than the original pressing. It has that low end across the entire mix. All the instruments can be heard equally. Nothing jumps out as abrasive. In the original mix, there is a little bit of like high end that can be abrasive at times. I doubted whether or not to compare each of my original press albums to the box set remasters. I figured that the mastering engineer attempted to keep a cohesive EQ for each album within what was possible, given the mix they were working with. I figured I would hear the greatest difference in comparing that first album, the first full length. The harsh highs of the original mix, especially in Brian's noisier contributions, are tamed. They kind of rolled off that harsh top end in the original mix. The low end was fixed, it was brought up. The mastering engineer tried to give every member some equal attention. And that's mainly what I hear in the remaster. This is just the first of 5 records and a cassette, as well as a book in this box set. So if I plan on listening to these records on any given day, I'm probably going to put on the newer pressings in the box set, the remasters. Also to save my original pressings from being played out. So that's pretty much it for the first record, or what I decided to listen to first of the box set. It Is It Critical Band, the first full-length album from 90 Day Men. The remaster sounds fantastic, put out by a new Morrow group. Do I wish the vinyl were even quieter? Yeah, I do. But the mastering engineer made major improvements overall in the EQ, and I appreciate that. On their second full-length album, To Everybody, we'll talk about like some of the EPs and unreleased stuff, the live recordings later, maybe discuss the book and the packaging a bit toward the end. But I've decided not to describe too much of what the band sounds like or make comparisons to other bands, because I really think that people should just go and check them out. I will say these few things about the band. They are a noisy, experimental, post-punk band in those early years when you could sort of combine progressive elements and like be kind of like an art band, the way Sonic Youth was. But in later years, they're composers. I mean, Andy, their keyboard player that got added later, and Robert Lowe, their bass player, who had a lot of like jazz influences in his playing. It really creates for like a sophisticated sound later in their career. And early in the band's career, it's more of like this post-hardcore, post-punk thing. So they really evolved quite a lot. Their music requires more of an adventurous taste. Somebody that is comfortable with exploration, dissonance, odd time signatures, and that kind of thing. If that sounds like your musical taste, you might dig it, but also it takes several listens, I think, to really appreciate what they are doing. If and when you get it, I think it could really blow your mind. To Everybody, the second full-length album, I had to put the original pressing of this on first and get a sense of the mix on this one. It is definitely louder, the original, than the previous album, the original previous album. So To Everybody, original pressing, is mastered louder than It Is It Critical Band, the original pressing. It's a better recording of the band than their first full length. Has more punch in the drums, better bass tone, bass is more present. However, at times it almost sounds like it was redlining, like blown out when it was getting mastered. I think it was in the mastering, because it's across the board. It's not any individual instrument that sounds like it's peaking. Not quite the levels of like Primus's Brown album, but approaching it. Whatever low end and punch was lacking in the first album was here tenfold in the second full length, To Everybody. I dig this mix and master on the original pressing, but comparing it to the remastered version in the box set, immediately the box set remaster sounds more controlled. It's loud enough, it has the low end present, but it doesn't sound blown out the way the original press does. I can hear everything well, all the instruments sounded balanced, the vinyl's slightly quieter than the original. I say slightly. It's more to be desired there. Brian and Robert's vocals sound better on the remaster, especially when they harmonize. There's better separation between vocals and instruments. It feels like the mids cut through the mix without some of those harsh highs that are present on the original pressing. Brian's guitar on this remaster contains all these beautiful harmonics that ring out. Tonally, this mix and master is quite good, and I think that there's a big improvement on that remaster of the second full length. On the third full length, though, this is where things changed for me a little bit. Panda Park is their third full length studio album, and it was a pretty big departure from the other albums. You could almost say that comparing any of their two albums is difficult because they evolved each time. They took risks. These songs, however, on Panda Park have a greater focus on the keyboards, keyboard player Andy, and feel like the compositions were written probably mostly by him. I had to compare the original pressing once again and see how it measured up with the remaster in the box set. But I can tell that the vinyl on the original pressing was quieter than the other original pressings. It also has probably the best mix and master of the three original full-length studio albums. Panda Park does. Everything sounds balanced. The instrumentation, the EQ, Robert's voice sounds really good in that first track. Sort of hovers above this groovy drone that's established by Brian and Casey. Andy's keys move the melody and provide occasional like jarring staccato sounds that are kind of sound electronic, but it's more of like a distorted organ. That mix, it's great in the original recording, especially Casey's drumming. In just that first track, there these prog elements that sound kind of like Houses of the Holy era Led Zeppelin. The drumming feels like a solid early 90s hip-hop track almost, you know, with the way it grooves, or like early Deftones or something. There are flute sounds and these soaring melodies on the keys that feel like it's this epic fantasy adventure. Probably not what their punk and post-punk followers really wanted from the band at this time, but something that one can appreciate once they get over themselves. I remember being disappointed with this album when it first came out. It was so different from what I was used to hearing, and I loved those first two studio albums. But now, being older, I can really understand how much the band matured and evolved into everything that is happening on this record. So, what about the remastered box set version of this? Because I was really, really happy with the first press version of Panda Park. This might be the first one where I slightly prefer the original pressing. The remastered one in the box set sounds a bit more compressed than the original pressing. And I'm not anti-compression. I understand how useful it can be, and sometimes it can really improve a mix. It's needed always for any mix. But the for whatever reason, this of all the albums in this box set, this one sounded more squished. The original mix and mastering allowed for a few interesting sounds on the keys and some of the nuances at the edges of the mid-highs to sort of jump out a bit more, and I missed that in the remastered version. It felt like the original pressing was more dynamic in terms of like volume changes in the band's performance. The original pressing allowed for a bit more air and space between instruments. Everything in the remaster is present in terms of the instrumentation, but the instruments just don't breathe as much as they do in the original pressing. Perhaps it's a bit squished, like over-compressed. Everything sounds okay. There's plenty of low end in the remaster. Everything sounds balanced. This compression thing is just something some people get picky about, and I can get picky about, because I don't mind it up to a point, but there is a point where I start to feel like everything's like this big brick of sound, and I can't hear the performance in the room as much. Is your average listener going to hear this? Probably not. Most modern music, I think, is overly compressed anyway. This could also just be an EQ thing in the mastering. It sounds like the highs were pulled down a bit. Low mids were boosted from the original mastering. That's what I hear. A different kind of compression could have maybe been used to get more low end out of the mix without it peaking, but who knows? It sounds fine. Maybe I prefer the original mix of Panda Park, and I don't know what the engineer was dealing with, you know, in terms of trying to get this recording to sound big, and what kind of like recording in the mix he had to try and compress and make sense. So what about the EP and some of the unreleased tracks? Well, I do have the 1975, 1977, 1998 EP on CD, and comparing it to the CD, it's like comparing apples and oranges. So I have a few of the early songs on 7-inch, like some of the singles. I already know that they don't sound awesome. The CD of the early EP sounds great. It sounds fine. But some of those early 7-inches, you know, they weren't great recordings to begin with, and they're punk rock DIY pressings. So that's what they sound like. They're okay, but They sound like, like a punk band that doesn't have a ton of money. The box set comes with this LP that's titled EPs, Singles, and Outtakes. This LP is basically that EP 1975, 1977, 1998. That's the whole title. Along with a few 7-inch singles that they put out early on, plus a couple of outtakes from that To Everybody era, and a couple of unreleased tracks. That first side, which was the first thing I ever heard of the band when I was 18, 19 years old, I heard the CD in my buddy's car sometime right after graduating high school. He was so stoked on that band, on 90 Day Men, and I remember liking parts of it and also being totally befuddled by how weird and unpredictable some of it was. I was amazed that my friend could air drum the parts in the car because they were so unconventional. And I've been a drummer for a long time. I had been playing for 5 or 6 years at that point. And they didn't make sense to me, those drum parts. Casey's drumming ended up being a huge influence on me later on. Watching him live was something I felt really lucky to be able to do. Twice I saw them open up for a couple other bands early on, probably right after that EP came out. And the second time I got to watch them, my band got to open up for them. So that was a really special treat. And Casey's drumming, his style was unlike anyone I had ever listened to. So this was maybe the last time in history, I think, when a post-punk band could be really experimental and there was actually an audience for it at the time, because they were associated with like the whole emo thing that was happening in the late 90s. So people were into it. Listening to that EP that I first heard in my friend's car on vinyl was a real treat for me because I could hear all these subtleties in what the band was doing that just got lost in that 90s digital recording. I could hear more reverberation of Casey's drumstick clicking on the rim. His bass drum had more boom, more resonance also. I could hear the drum head. There's more space and air between everything, more dynamics. There are a lot of volume changes in that first EP. I could hear Robert's bass a lot better. I think on that original CD, I could hardly hear him unless everyone else wasn't playing. And this is really where it becomes super worth owning this box set. If you appreciate that first EP, this is just so much better than the CD. My Trip to Venus, the first track, has never sounded better. I can't pick a favorite from that EP. They're all my favorite, but shout out to my buddy who always loved Hey Citronella the most. He loved that song. As far as the second side with the outtakes, a couple of previously unreleased tracks, they're honestly not my favorites. Not something that I dislike, but it's cool to hear some of those outtakes. I never been an outtake guy. Just give me the final theatrical cut version and I'm good. The one track on that second side that I really appreciate, always loved this song, definitely deserves attention, is From One Prima Donna to Another. If you like that first EP, that 1975, 1977, 1998 EP, that song From One Prima Donna to Another is a total banger. In my opinion, this LP in the box set sounds fantastic. It takes these early recordings that still have that gritty garage sound and makes them as polished as I think they could be. The live album, a few things to say about the book and the cassette that I want to get to in the packaging and stuff like that. But this live LP is my favorite thing in the entire box. I would have paid the $100 just to own the live album. But then again, I'm a huge fan. It's probably the best live recording of the band. It captures the band when they were at their prime, in my opinion. It's a fantastic set of songs, really solid performances. It puts me back to those 2 times I was blown away watching them, 6 feet away from my face. The live album is called the Peel Sessions because they recorded this with John Peel in 2001 as part of his amazing and extensive archive. It's hard to know whether or not to call it a live album, as it is recorded live in a studio and not in front of an audience. It only has 4 tracks on it. Some of their longer songs from kind of like that later part of their career. Sort of is a Country in Love. That's the first track. Methodist is the second track on side A. Then on side B, second side, you have Hans Lucas and National Car Crash. These are some of my favorite tracks that the band has written, and the recording sounds great. When Hans Lucas comes on, I feel like I'm going to lose my mind in the best way, especially when everything drops out, except for Brian just bending that one note on his guitar before everyone comes back in. It's incredible. Once again, though, I can tell that the vinyl is kind of noisy. This thing's been cleaned in an ultrasonic cleaner twice. It just bugs me a bit that only when the music is quiet enough for me to hear it, or when I drop the needle, first drop the needle down, that's when I hear that hiss. And I think, geez, did we really need the colored vinyl and the splatter vinyl and all of that? Why is this becoming such a popular thing to do? I mean, yeah, it looks cool, but I went looking for the black vinyl version of the box set just to see, and it was super duper on sale on Amazon, so I bought it for $55. Sellers on Discogs were selling it for brand new sealed copy for $70. Even Morrow Group, who pressed it, have it on sale for $90, and if it's your first order, you get 15% off of that. So this is great news for people that want this box set if you haven't jumped on it yet. But my God, it's it's every 90 Day Men album, and it's a great book, and this feels criminal to me. Luckily, I did snag the silver version of the box set that came with the cassette early on. This one is sold out now, so that kind of sucks for people that really wanted that. But I did pick up that black vinyl version just today before I filmed this video for $55 on Amazon, which is less than $10 a record. It's crazy to me. So please go check it out if you enjoy experimental post-punk type stuff. I do want to say a little bit about the cassette. I mean, it sounds like a cassette. I don't have the most awesome cassette setup, but I have like semi-decent cassette player running into my system out there, and I sometimes feel nostalgic for that cassette sound. And hey, like a few of the cassettes I own sound surprisingly good, like the Sausage cassette with Les Claypool. The CD is extremely expensive if you go on Discogs, so I got the cassette and it sounds incredible. This bonus cassette that came with the silver version of the 90 Day Men box set, it has some songs from super early in their career. It's titled Orbit to Orbit, and it states that the songs were written and recorded sometime between June of 95 and January of 97. There are tracks that I love on this cassette, but there are also some that I could skip, or rather tracks that didn't leave a lasting impression on me. Some of that garage DIY punk recording sound, which is kind of like a nice way of saying it's a poor recording, The cool thing is, you know, being able to hear those post-punk roots when the band was at its most raw. Those first 3 tracks, 17,000 kilojoules of light, Rex Roth, and Orbit to Orbit. They come from their first 7-inch single called Taking Apart the Vessel. And I happen to have this. It's a super DIY. You could 7-inch. You can tell that they put it together themselves, and it's a super cool thing to have. The songs are way more post-punk, post-hardcore. They still had Chandler McWilliams on bass, their original bass player. You can hear his vocals on Orbit to Orbit. It's really obvious how much Robert Lowe influenced the exploration of the band later on. Robert has these jazz playing influences on his bass. He's got this really unique vocal style that gave the band a more artsy, kind of sophisticated sound. And Chandler was also cool in his own way. He provided a lot of samples. He had a cool voice for like that post-punk style. And you can tell that Brian's guitar playing changed a lot after Robert joined the band. Hearing these early songs with Chandler, you can hear how Brian was still using, you know, power chords. He's still doing a lot of power chord stuff, and it was only like a year later where he's exploring this selective way of playing minimally that suited what Robert and Andy were doing. And, you know, Brian kind of like more and more takes a back seat and provides all these textures to the songs. There's definitely a big shift that happens when Chandler, their old bass player, leaves and Robert joins. Brian's now in this band called Fax. It's Facs, you know, F.A.C.S. Fax, and a really great band. He's in this super like out there, noisy, experimental, I don't know, but post something band, but they're amazing. So check it out if you can. I kind of feel like telling anybody that missed out on getting this cassette that they aren't missing a whole lot. Don't get me wrong, I'm super happy that I have it because I'm a huge fan. But does your average listener that checks out this band and digs it really need this cassette? Probably not. A couple of notes on the packaging and the book. The book is really beautiful. It's got all of these interviews. People like Cedric Bixler Zavala from At the Drive-In and Mars Volta is in there more than I thought he would be. And they interview friends and other musicians, and they they have pictures from their early days, rehearsals, performances, hanging out, pictures they took on tour. Yeah, this thing is, it's significant. It's there's a lot more than I thought there would be. There's interviews with every member of the band. They go through pretty much their whole career, and they talk about people's first impressions when seeing the band. I mean, there's just these beautiful photos in here that are stunning. You know, you could spend a day reading through these interviews. I like going back to it from time to time. There's plenty of text here to check out, and I really appreciated that this was a book that they really put effort into. It wasn't just something thrown together to complete the box set. They really put a lot of thought and effort into this. So I think that it's really worth getting this. You know, you can pick this thing up between $70 to $90, maybe even $55 if it's still on sale on Amazon. And just get it before, you know, everyone realizes they look back and they missed something really great and really important. I think that this band is so much more important to everything that happened in the 90s and early 2000s than they're getting credit for. I do think it's one of those bands that people will look back and say this was a really unique and important thing. So if anybody's watching these videos, yeah, go check out the 90 Day Men box set right here. And I'm probably gonna throw on the live album again and listen to Hans Lucas and flip out. So that's it for now. On to the next record to review.